Top 6 actors Christopher Lee hated the most, the untold story. Christopher Lee was arguably one of the greatest actors ever to appear before a camera. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall, with a gaze that could chill an audience and a voice that weighed 1,000 years, he became cinema's greatest Count Dracula, Hammer Horror's most profitable star, and, subsequently, the very personification of villains such as Saruman of The Lord of the Rings and Count Dooku of Star Wars. He was an actor who appeared destined to play bad, aristocratic, cold, magnetic. But what most viewers never knew is that the intensity they witnessed on screen was not merely acting. Behind that skillfully crafted facade was a man of stringent standards, aristocratic reserve, and a military background that informed his perception of people. Discipline, preparation, respect, and professional gravity were his credo. Short of those values, you'd catch him, cross him, and he never forgot. Unlike so many Hollywood actors who fought in the tabloids or blew up on location, Christopher Lee did not throw fits or cause scenes. He didn't have to. Disapproval could be conveyed with no more than a raised eyebrow, a hesitation in his sentence, or a single word. But once his verdict was rendered, it was irrevocable, and those who fell on the wrong side of it were forever in the cold. During his lifetime of more than 7 decades in the acting profession, 6 figures in particular earned his enduring contempt: actors and directors whose work, conduct, or ideology undermined at its core what Lee esteemed most. Their tales disclose not only battles of ego, but something more profound: the uncompromising moral and creative code of a man who lived as passionately as he acted. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. The first of them was Louis Jourdan, a French actor best recalled for romantic heroes and smooth charm. In 1977, the BBC launched what was intended to be the ultimate production of Dracula, true to Bram Stoker's book and imbued with dramatic integrity. This should have been Lee's time. He had played Dracula for Hammer Films time and time again, but became increasingly angry at how the studio diminished the character into a caricature, a hissing beast devoid of his wit and seductive charm. Lee had long promoted a genuine literary Dracula, a killer disguised by aristocratic refinement, and thought the BBC might at last provide that vision. Instead, the part was offered to Jourdan. To Lee, it was not just a lost role. It was an insult, a repudiation of all he had struggled for. Jourdan's interpretation focused on romance and poise, reducing Dracula to a drawing room seducer, not a killer. Lee brushed it off as a vampire for people who don't like horror films. He never publicly denounced Jourdan, but his disdain was evident. If questioned in interviews, he would stare, lock eyes with the reporter with that icy gaze, and say they wanted elegance. Dracula is not elegant. He is death. Jourdan was never referred to in Lee's subsequent autobiographies, a silence eloquent with meaning. To Lee, Jourdan didn't just play Dracula poorly. He represented the dilution of horror itself, proof of what happened when art was softened for palatability. The second figure was Richard Chamberlain, America's golden boy of television in the 1960s and 70s. Chamberlain was a talented actor, steeped in method-influenced emotional exploration, and beloved for his dashing charisma. But when he encountered Lee in The Three Musketeers and its sequel, The Four Musketeers, fire became ice. Lee geared up his villain, Rochefort, with meticulous detail. He learned every line, every block, every gesture before appearing on set, as if commanding an army. Chamberlain, by contrast, preferred to discover his character in the moment, trying different emotions, improvising and reshaping takes to seek what he called emotional truth. To Lee, this was indulgent, messy, and unprofessional. One afternoon, following several takes with Chamberlain repeatedly changing his acting, Lee addressed director Richard Lester in his booming voice. "Is Mr. Chamberlain going to make a decision today, or shall we just shoot all interpretations and let the people decide?" The set grew quiet. Chamberlain, wounded, charged Lee with being wooden and mechanical. Lee's response was brief: I like to call it professional. From there on, the chill between them dropped to minus. Chamberlain regarded Lee as unshakable, like playing opposite the Tower of London. Lee regarded Chamberlain as self-indulgent and sloppy. In fact, it was a conflict of philosophies. British discipline versus American indulgence of emotional spontaneity. Neither was completely wrong, but for Lee, Chamberlain represented a perilous trend, blurring decadence with art. While Chamberlain exposed Lee's contempt for sloppy acting, the then-rising star director Michael Reeves uncovered something much more intimate: Lee's rage at disrespect. Reeves had hit the mark with Witchfinder General and was considered a visionary of contemporary horror. When he directed Lee in The Oblong Box in 1968, the collaboration appeared promising. Instead, it was a disaster. Reeves, only 24, treated Lee not as a seasoned star, but as a prop. In one scene, he told Lee, "Just stand there and look terrified. We'll fix it in editing." For Lee, who built characters from psychological truth, even in the campiest scripts, this was beyond insulting. He informed Reeves in his eerie baritone, "Young man, I have been making audiences feel fear since before you were born. Perhaps you might consider that I have some experience with the process." Reeves dismissed him. Lee then went on and played his part with icy professionalism, but would have no more creative interaction. To him, Reeves embodied all that was wrong with a new generation of directors, mislaking shock and gore for true horror, forgetting the psychological complexity that made monsters frightening. Reeves died young the next year, but Lee never softened his evaluation. In subsequent interviews, he characterized certain directors, never Reeves himself, as men who believed a bucket of blood could substitute for genuine dread. Reeves to Lee had transgressed a line no artist ever should, treating an actor as a tool rather than a partner. The most intimate of disappointments was with Roger Moore. Unlike the others, Moore was a friend, not just a colleague. The two were familiar with each other since the 1950s, their families eating together, their sense of humor compatible. Both were old service intelligence hands, both had aristocratic air, and both became actors in the British business. But as Moore's career ascended with The Saint and later James Bond, while Lee wrestled with typecasting in horror films, their relationship changed. The turning point was with The Man with the Golden Gun in 1974, when Lee played Scaramanga the Assassin across from Moore's Bond. Lee treated Scaramanga as a nuanced character, a refined killer with psychic wounds. Moore, on the other hand, treated Bond as wispy, suave, wisecracking. For Lee, this minimized Ian Fleming's creation. Fleming, his cousin, had pictured Bond as a flawed man, not a cartoon figure. Lee resented Moore's caricature of diminishing the franchise to a farce. The two men were civil on set, but the warmth evaporated. Lee afterwards discreetly ceased referring to Moore in interviews, giving only faint endorsements for Moore's peculiar charm. To Lee, Moore represented a violation of seriousness in film, selecting entertainment over verity, charm over substance. Their bond expired not in flames, but in ice. Then came Vincent Price, the horror master of America. Lee and Price should have been friends on paper. Both added sophistication to horror. Both battled typecasting. Both lent the genre a dignity it could ill afford. But in real life, Lee and Price danced around each other with courteous competition. Lee treated horror as a seriously deadly art form that required authenticity and psychological complexity. Price, especially during the 1970s, adopted camp show business and even parody, leaning into winks and flourishes that thrilled audiences but outraged Lee. Vincent plays at horror. Lee once grumbled after a glass of too much wine. His performances are arched eyebrows and great lines. There is no conviction there. Price, meanwhile, intimated that Lee was too intense for American audiences, too rigid. They never collaborated at the peak of their abilities, maybe sensibly. To Lee, Price represented the threat of playing with horror as a lark and monsters as diversion and not terror. Lee did, however, esteem him. When Price passed away in 1993, Lee published a befitting tribute. But beneath the rhetoric, There were those who knew him and felt the shadow of competition, feeling that Price had leapt into camp just when horror required seriousness. Then there was Klaus Kinski, the one man Lee publicly excoriated without ever collaborating with. Kinski, with his hot temper and violent outbursts, was the black legend of European cinema. His collaborations with Werner Herzog produced unforgettable films, but at the cost of terrorizing crews and co-stars. To Lee, this was unforgivable. Acting was a profession, a duty, and a privilege, not a license for cruelty. Lee, who had fought alongside ordinary soldiers in World War II and respected hierarchy and duty, despised Kinski's tantrums, threats, and megalomania. He once stated flatly, "He is a madman posing as an artist." To Lee, Kinski was the ultimate degradation of film, the legend that geniuses justified abuse. He felt this kind of conduct was nothing if not trickery, a violation of the obligation actors owed to their fellow players. Of all the actors on his personal blacklist, Kinski was the one Lee most thoroughly reviled. He acted monsters on the screen, but he never accepted them in life. Glancing over these 6 disputes, Jordan, Chamberlain, Reeves, Moore, Price, and Kinski, a picture of a man whose requirements were both his biggest advantage and biggest limitation is drawn. Lee was no mean rival. He did not despise out of jealousy or vanity. His verdicts always adhered to principle, artistic morality, professionalism, respect, seriousness. He detested diluting horror, indulging in artifice, disrespect towards directors, trivializing roles, theater sneering at darkness, and abusive exploitation. Each one on his list symbolized something he would not forgive: betrayal of art, betrayal of professionalism, or betrayal of decency. When he died in 2015 at the age of 93, Lee left behind not only 250 films, but also a code of conduct that defined him. In a business of compromise, he was not one to be compromised. In an era of slack celebrity, he represented discipline. His villains remain not only because of his voice and presence, but because they were an extension of the man himself, uncompromising, principled, intimidating. Christopher Lee forgot not and forgave not. And perhaps that's why his shadow remains so cast over cinema, not simply because he played the baddie, but because he comprehended him, and because he insisted that those of us who played it did so never, ever lightly.